one of the reasons why I think collective impact is really effective, beyond the 5 conditions and the preconditions, is that it actually is designed in such a way that it shifts how people think about and act on really tough issues. And as we've been looking at collective impact, you know, we've been thinking, let's make those explicit, because they're implicit. They, you know, the approach or the framework kind of encourages them. But we thought it was important to start making them explicit. And there's 3 that we've really pulled out here from our own experience and learning applying it. And the first is that you really need to understand and recognize the importance of and adapt to complexity. And it starts right at the beginning with the assumption, when you bring multiple sectors and perspectives around the same table, why are you doing it? Well, you're doing it because you understand that the issue is dynamic and well beyond the capacity of any one of these groups working in isolation to actually affect the kind of change that's needed. And the fact that these diverse perspectives spend time thinking, talking, and learning together is part of how we co-create a richer understanding of the problem, which allows us to reframe it and therefore generate from amongst those conversations and that learning a set of options that we wouldn't necessarily have seen if we'd stayed in our own lane or in our own silo, right? So that's the first. The second, which I also think is really interesting, is that we need to absolutely ensure that there are quality programs and services being offered to address issues that people need help with. But beyond that, the real place where collective impact can have an impact is looking beyond the programs, looking beyond those services, and really saying, what are the systemic barriers that are getting in the way? And one of the best ways to kind of differentiate program solutions versus system comes from the work of Karen Pittman and the Forum for Youth Investment in the US. And she says it like this. She says, programmatic interventions will help a person beat the odds, but a systemic intervention actually changes the odds for everybody. And Tim Drayman from Social Innovation Generation Canada says, really, when you work at the level of systems change, what you're doing is you're shifting the conditions that hold a problem in place, right? We keep working on better programs and getting annoyed that the system doesn't change. And that's not what this is about, right? The collective impact table, because it's distinct and apart from day-to-day organizational work, that's that place, right? Where you have opportunity, I think, to really innovate and think differently and come up with system change strategies. And then the last of the 3 that we often talk about is really rethinking who's involved, who's leading, whose wisdom is driving the process. And you've articulated it beautifully in how you've integrated, you know, the unique strength of Maori and Erie partnership in the work in your community. That's what this is. We need those content subject matter experts bringing their wisdom to the table. But because we know place matters, we also equally need the wisdom that a lived experience or context expert also brings. And it's the marriage of those 2 that increases the odds that you're going to end up with a workable solution. So I think it's important to realize this is a different approach. In fact, I will have to say that the best definition I think I ever heard of collective impact is it's the co-created innovation space that leaders create, because 90% of the time they see they've got great organizations delivering good services, and no matter how hard they work, no matter how fast they work, they're still not making enough of a difference given the scope and scale of some of these issues we're trying to address. So if we don't protect a time and a space to think beyond the day-to-day and imagine and test and try new things, nothing's ever going to change. So that, I think, for me is a nice way to think about collective impact. And then I think if I'm thinking kind of sort of all the way forward, if I were going to wrap it all up, I think what I would say is, as you go on this collective impact journey, remember, collective impact, that however powerful the framework, isn't always the answer for everything, right? It's not always the right solution. It's a solution, though, that's best suited for complex, dynamic issues and situations. Also, it's not a recipe, right? So we got these 5 conditions, we've got these preconditions, that's great. They're a roadmap that help you figure out what the core elements are you need to pay attention to, but they have to be adapted and tailored as you've done yourself to the unique context of community. And it's really actually inspiring to see how you can accelerate this as a field catalyst by just holding up the creativity of one community to another. And while I think part of the attraction to collective impact as a framework is it's simple, it's clear, and easy to understand. And it gives you the key ingredients for successful community change, no doubt. But that doesn't necessarily automatically mean that when you go and take this nice, elegant, simple framework and apply it to your specific issue in a particular community, it ain't going to be messy. I can guarantee you it will be messy, right? And not to be afraid of the mess, but we aren't used to it because we're used to applying a proven practice, and that's not what this is. If we knew what the answer was, we would have done it already. This is the realm of, there was someone who said, of safe fail experimentation. This is that space, right, where we're trying new things to augment what we already know. And that's how we're going to find the next paradigm. So with that, from your experience, what pieces of advice would you want to offer in terms of working with this as a framework?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot to reflect on there. And yes, before we sort of wrap up, I'd like to kind of share some thoughts around, this is about taking hold of an approach that can be used as we're reimagining the systems and the processes, we want to call those, in terms of our health reforms have actually opened the door to this reimagining of what the future can hold for our communities to deal with the inequities that we know are prevalent. The Aotearoa legislation in terms of meaning healthy futures, how do we bring that to life? Well, we can bring it to life through our conversations with community and really get that first condition underway around what matters to whānau and having that real investment up front and do that and do it well, and not be afraid of it, and not be afraid of the mess that it can be in terms of those conversations are difficult, but just building that authenticity in those relationships. The balance of power is a big one for us. We've had traditional contracting approaches, and this really turns everything on its head to provide a balance of power in terms of funder, provider, and those with lived experience. There's a real genuine intent to make that shift, but it's not without its challenges. But I'm an optimist, so bring it on. And then you talk about the considering whose eyes are on the problem, moving to that stronger whānau voice, those with the lived experience again, and obviously recognizing iwi leadership in terms of te tiriti, and I think that is front and center again in everything that we're taking forward in these localities. So yes, it is a simple framework, it's elegant, and again, as you say, but not without its complexities. So the last piece of advice that I kind of heard from many of the collective impact forums is that collaboration moves at the speed of trust. So my advice is to work on building those strong, authentic relationships and absolutely invest in it. And that's really what I see will be the first way of paving the way for success going forward.